Of all roller coasters found around the world, no more have been built by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma. This is a massive accomplishment since the company is only 45 years old, and they've done so by averaging nearly 10 new coasters a year. This company has truly gone from the bottom to the tip top of the amusement industry, and their story is much more complicated than you may think. If you've seen my Intamin video, this will be much different, as Vekoma has installed nearly twice as many coasters, and unlike Intamin, most of these installations are cloned layouts. So as we go forward, many of the repeated layouts will be glanced over, but still, every coaster built will be mentioned. While starting the same year as Intamin, Vekoma would hit the ground running with a much larger slate of roller coasters. This was thanks to Aero Development, who was at their peak of power in the late 70s. After developing the tubular steel track and perfecting the Mine Train coaster, Aero would take home another record as the manufacturer to pull off the first successful inversions with their corkscrew coasters in 1975. While growing to build 20 inverting coasters by 1978, their production couldn't handle the global demand their hot product was generating. To remedy this, Aero would contact the small Dutch equipment manufacturer Vekoma to be their broker for all coasters in Europe. Aero would even travel to the Netherlands for months to teach Vekoma all their knowledge of track, train, and ride manufacturing. Vekoma would take this information and add their Dutch engineering to deviate from Aero's more stubborn continual radius design. After debuting their first model at the Anakermis Fair, Vekoma would open 3 in-park coasters with the same layout, known as the corkscrew with Bayern curve. While featuring the same height and speed on nearly the same footprint as Aero's corkscrew coasters, this model would shockingly be twice as long by performing a second lap around the layout with the titular Bayern curve, a helix-like element. These 3 would all open in Western Europe, with Super Whirble at Holiday Park, Tornado at Walibi Belgium, and Super Spiral at Trommeland Park, which was the traveling coaster built the year before. While Europeans had just been exposed to this and Schwarzkopf's first loop the year before, these inverting coasters would take off just as they had in America, and began Vekoma on a huge trajectory. This would continue into the next year, where 2 more Bayern curve corkscrews would open, with probably the most famous at the UK's Alton Towers and the first outside of Europe at Argentina's Ital Park. After a 6th Bayern curve corkscrew at La Ronde named Super Ménage, 1981 would see the debut of 3 other coasters, all with new layouts. 2 of these would debut as a new model called the Whirlwind. This would be a much smaller alternative to the Bayern curve, with much smaller stats, but still managed to pack in 2 inversions, with a drop directly into a corkscrew, a turn, and another corkscrew before ending the ride. This would begin a common trend for Vekoma, as like Aero, they would master the basics of a model and then use that to create many new layouts, based on what they called the MK1200 design. Also opening would be their largest coaster yet, Python at Efteling. Matching Aero for the most inversions on a coaster with 4, this double loop and corkscrew would do exactly that, with an almost identical layout to Aero's Carolina Cyclone, which had opened the year before. The new Whirlwind model would be popular enough to receive 2 more installations in 1982, with one being Whirlwind at Bobbejaanland and Corkscrew at Thailand's Magic Land. The first 5 years of Vekoma would be pretty standard, with 1983 seeing 5 more coasters with similar layouts to years before, starting with another Bayern curve named Corkscrew at Spanish City Amusement Park. The Whirlwind would see 2 more models as well, with Montanha Especial at Brazil's Tivoli Park and Whirlwind at the UK's Clacton Pier. The final two would be two more double loop and corkscrews, but having slightly different layouts. Montagna Russa at Diverland would be the standard cloned layout of Python, but Big Loop at Heidi Park would feature a slightly modified layout, with more straight track and an elevated section before the helix at the end. This distinction would technically make this Vekoma's first coaster with a custom layout, and mirrored the layout of Aero's Dragon Fire, which had opened 2 years before. After essentially being an extension to Aero for their existence, with nearly identical trains and layouts, Vekoma would have their first breakout year in 1984, with a brand new model and new trains. After their first coaster in the United States with another whirlwind at Rye Playland, Vekoma would debut their first shuttle coaster layout. Aero and Schwarzkopf had debuted their shuttle coasters in 1977, and while using different methods, they would both launch into a loop and fall back to complete the full layout in reverse. Instead of a launch and one loop, Vekoma's new model, which they called the Boomerang, would begin by being hoisted backwards up an inclined spike. After reaching the top, the train would release and fly through the station into a brand new element Vekoma would call the Cobra Roll. This element would soar upwards into a Sidewinder-like inversion, but then level out and do the same inversion in reverse to turn the train back the other way. After that, the coaster would soar through a loop and then up another inclined spike and be winched up. After reaching the top, the train would fall backwards again and complete the layout in reverse before returning to the station. By completing the layout twice, the coaster would actually complete a record-breaking 6 inversions in a super compact footprint. This revolutionary design would be massively popular upon debut, with 4 debuting in different countries around the world this year. 3 would open simply named Boomerang at Bellewaerde Park, Rafael Padilla, and La Ronde, and one named Sea Serpent at Maurice Piers. Some of these coasters would also open with a new shaped train from Vekoma, featuring the same frame and chassis as Aero's, but with a slightly more rounded shape. These new trains and slightly modified track, as well as opening coasters in every country in North America, would be Vekoma's statement to become their own distinct manufacturer from Aero, and would begin to majorly affect the roller coaster industry as a whole. After building a new groundbreaking model, Vekoma would build their last original Bayern Curve with Screamer at Boblo Island, as well as another double loop and corkscrew with Shaman at Gardaland. The Boomerang would continue to grow, with Vekoma's first coaster in China at Star Lake Amusement Park and another at Tivoli Land, as well as Cobra at West Midlands Safari Park. Finally, Vekoma would build their most unique and first non-inverting coaster at Austria's Vienna Prater that would also be their smallest yet. The Wild Mouse model, which was populated all over through the 60s, were made up of the classic wooden model, the massively popular but tiny BA Shift model, and the growing Togo-built model at this time. Vekoma would use a brand new track style and a 4-person car to travel one of the largest Wild Mouse layouts around for the time. The ride would begin with a wonky tilted lift hill before completing a hairpin turn filled layout with a few large drops in between. This ride, named Speedy Gonzales with 3 E's, would be the only Wild Mouse coaster Vekoma would ever produce, but the larger modernized layout with large drops would inspire many manufacturers years later. Vekoma would have another big year in 1986, with 4 coasters, starting with another Boomerang named Tidal Wave at Trimper Rides. This would be followed with the introduction of another compact inverting model called the Tornado. This would stand slightly taller and faster than the Whirlwind, but essentially be the same layout, but replacing the first corkscrew with a vertical loop. This coaster, named after the model, would open at Tokyo Summerland and operate until a couple years ago. The final 2 coasters would be 2 more with custom layouts, and actually be Aero coasters that Vekoma would complete due to Aero's bankruptcy at the time. The first would be a large coaster made for Expo 86 in Vancouver, named Scream Machine. The coaster would climb over 100 feet and turn into a small drop directly into a loop and a sidewinder, an element that would begin as a loop but would then turn out at the top, which Arrow had created a few years before. The ride would then drop into a double corkscrew and low-to-the-ground helix before returning to the station. The second, and much more interesting, is the well-named Crazy Roller Coaster at Nanhu Amusement Park in China. This terrain-based ride would begin with one of the most diabolical first drops you'll ever see, wildly banking and diving down the hill before rising into two hang-time-filled corkscrews. The coaster would then charge over a bunny hill and into a first-of-its-kind element, the reverse sidewinder. This would be exactly what it sounds like, with the sidewinder being taken in the opposite direction to be a dive loop-like element, followed by a loop and a helix to end the ride. If this ride tracked well, this could have been one of the best steel coasters ever made to that point, as the awesome terrain created one of the most unique layouts ever seen for the time. "1987 would begin fairly standard with 3 more boomerangs at Butlins and Zygopolis, as well as Bat at Canada's Wonderland, but would also see the introduction of a new model. Arrow had introduced their revolutionary suspended coaster earlier in the 80s, which they would improve greatly through the decade, and Vekoma, as Arrow's copycat at the time, wanted a piece of the pie. This model, which they called the Swinging Turns, would use nearly identical track and trains to Arrow's coasters and fit a very small footprint. Debuting as Air Race at Bobbejaanland Land, the airplane-themed trains would take a simple but scenic layout over water with winding left and right turns before a large drop before the brakes. The next year would be Vekoma's biggest yet, with 9 coasters and new models introduced. A fourth and final double loop and corkscrew would open as Mira Looping at Miropolis, as well as the incredibly popular Boomerang seeing 3 more models around the world. At Avenirland, Titan at World Expo Park, and Coca-Cola Roller at the Glasgow Garden Festival. Lupin would open at Tussenfried as another tornado, and Centrifuge would also open at World Expo Park as another swinging turns, with the same layout of Air Race. That wasn't all for World Expo Park though, as the park would receive a third coaster from Vekoma as one of their new models for the year. Being their first indoor coaster, this would open with a brand new track style and simple 2-row, 2-wide trains with lap bars. 2 of these would open with a space theme, certainly trying to use the aesthetic of Disney's world-famous Space Mountain. Supernova would be a simple layout with a seemingly endless right turn, but Space Center at Phantasialand would feature a far more ambitious layout. By far the longest coaster Vekoma had built at the time, and would be for years, the indoor coaster would use 3 lifts to travel over 3,800 feet of track and glide through many turns and small drops. Along with these custom MK900 coasters, Vekoma would debut a smaller train model with the custom MK700. This would feature a single-car train that would seat 2 riders in lap-sitting style and open as Nightmare at Boblo Island. This would be similar to Supernova, taking a long right turn to snake down a short layout before sliding into the brakes. After their biggest year in 1988, Vekoma would match their 9 coasters again, but this time with an even more impressive lineup. After another boomerang in Flashback at Six Flags Over Texas, a third natural disaster named model would be introduced with the Hurricane. A more appropriate name for this model would have been the Single Loop and Corkscrew, as the coaster did just that, as well as a helix before returning to the station. This would be Comet Space at Big Bang Schroetumpf, and would be followed by 3 more MK1200 coasters, each having custom layouts. The smallest would be the still impressive French Revolution at Lotte World, and while only featuring one loop, it would still fly through a compact, fully indoor layout with a picturesque helix at the end. The next would be the compact Kamikaze at Conco's Party Pier, which featured 5 inversions including a reverse sidewinder, a double corkscrew, and a brand new inversion known as a butterfly. This would essentially be 2 loops joined at the valley for a very intense double inversion. The butterfly would only be featured on 2 coasters, Kamikaze and Vekoma's biggest coaster of the year, Gooderiks at Park Asterix. After Aero had beaten the inversion record over the years, Vekoma would match the record of 7 that had been achieved the year before. After dropping into the butterfly, the train would fly into a batwing, a first for Vekoma, which would essentially be a dive loop followed by an Immelman-type maneuver to turn the train around, before a loop and a double corkscrew. After all these inverting coasters, Vekoma would also flesh out their smaller models as well, with another MK900 model, again at Lotte World, named Londonderry Express. This would be outdoors, and easily be Vekoma's smallest and tamest coaster yet, with only a few tiny dips and turns. The MK700 would see another installation as well, with the simply named Roller at Tele-Coup. This hillside coaster would snake through the woods with a long 12-car train in a well-paced layout. This 12-car train would be nothing compared to the second version of the MK700 that would debut this year, with 2 coasters in a one-off model known as the Illusion. You'll think you're seeing an illusion the first time you see these trains too, as Revolution at Bobillon Land would feature a 30-car, 60-passenger train, and Chaos at Opryland would feature an even more ridiculous 40-car, 80-passenger train. This insanely long vehicle would have an expectedly limited layout, winding up a super extended spiraling tire lift before some small dips. While certainly an odd experiment, I always appreciate hyper-capacity focused rides, and the unique experience made this a noteworthy model. After a dominant decade full of coasters, 1990 would be a smaller year with just 2 boomerangs at Parc des Attractions de Montagique and Knott's Berry Farm, and a final tornado at Aventure Park Hellendoorn, but it was all in preparation for bigger things. After Hershey Park's Boomerang Sidewinder, the rest of 1991 would be Vekoma's first experiment building fully children's coasters. After building more family-friendly layouts with the MK700 and 900 coasters, Vekoma would debut 3 new layouts for their new junior coaster. These would all use a similar track to the MK700 coasters and single-car trains with a shared lap bar. The first and smallest of these to open would be Octorbahn at Rostiland, with a layout that would be known as the 207-meter junior coaster. This under 30-foot tall layout would travel a tiny course with gentle turns and a helix finale. The second would be the 335-meter coaster, which would be nearly twice as long and tall, and featured a bit more intense layout with more sustained forces. This would open as Roller Skater at Melly Park, with a shoe-themed train that would be used on many other coasters in the future. The final would be a custom layout also named Roller Skater at Fanfari. This would be an indoor layout twice as long as the 207-meter model, with a small pre-lift section and much larger turns and drops than the other 2 juniors of the year. The ride also used a small tire boost section and a sharp hill towards the end as it toured the Family Entertainment Center. While on paper these may seem like any other kids' coasters, Vekoma was making their statement in the always needed children coaster world, and besides Zaire, the market was largely untapped and ready to expand. The next year would feature, you guessed it, another boomerang at Vienna Prater, as well as 3 more junior coasters. Two more 335-meter models would open at West Midlands Safari Park and Farup Summerland, as well as Vekoma's tiniest coaster yet with the new 85-meter model. Roll Shoe Coaster would open at Fiesta, Texas with an extremely simple oval layout over a hill. But also opening in 1992 would be the immaculately themed Euro Disneyland, where Vekoma would build one of their most amazing coasters yet, Space Mountain. Oh wait, not that one yet. This Space Mountain would be an indoor MK700 at Formosan Aboriginal Culture Village as yet another indoor space-themed coaster. The ride would travel through a very familiar light tunnel before a tame layout with intergalactic effects. Actually opening at Euro Disneyland would be the debut of a new model for Vekoma and their first coaster at a Disney park. After Arrow's mine trains had recently gotten a second boost in popularity, Vekoma would debut their own take on the model on the fourth and final version of Big Thunder Mountain in the world. Unlike those before it, this mountain was located on an island, requiring the train to go under the river to get there and back from the main path. Once on the mountain, the runaway train would complete a familiar layout before an elongated drop back underwater to return to the station. This picturesque ride is widely considered the best version of Big Thunder and would not be the only mine train for the year. Colorado would open at Walibi Wavre with a layout that would be cloned multiple times, making this the first 785-meter mine train. This would travel a similar themed landscape to Big Thunder, with rockwork, 2 parallel lifts, and 2 large helixes. In 1993, Vekoma would break their record for most coasters in a year again with 13, 11 of which being an abundance of junior coasters. The 335-meter layout would receive an installation at Liufu Village, along with 5 207-meter layouts around the world, including Gadget's Go Coaster at Disneyland. There would also be a second and final tiny 85-meter model at Taiwan's Window on the World theme park. That same park would also open a custom layout named Laser Blaster, with an indoor layout and fun lights. This would be one of 4 custom junior layouts that year, along with a tiny unnamed coaster in a mall in Brazil. Rasender Roland would be perhaps the best junior yet, with a more exciting layout starting with a large helix and interacting with the park's Schwarzkopf Nessie. The coaster would also feature a mine train lead car that would be featured on a handful of junior coasters that year. Space Adventure would open alongside one of the 207-meter coasters of the year at Kumdori Land with 2 lifts into a large dome for another fun but hard to tell indoor layout with turns. Kumdori Land was not finished though, as they would debut a third Vekoma for the year, and by far the biggest, with Black Hole Express. This custom MK1200 would open as Vekoma's tallest coaster by far, with a massive 170-foot lift along the hillside, making it the 6th tallest coaster in the world upon opening. The behemoth would begin spiraling down a helix directly into 2 massive vertical loops. After hitting a mid-course, the coaster would dive into a reverse sidewinder and a turn through a tunnel before a double helix finale. Oh, and there was another boomerang in the UK. While 1994 would feature fewer coasters than the previous year, it would be more diverse, with 6 coasters, all of which being different models. There would be yet another boomerang in Qatar named Thunderbolt, and another 207-meter junior at Kentucky Kingdom. More uniquely, Vienna Prater would open the final single-file MK700 coaster with a very compact footprint. Unlike the giant long trains that had been experimented with this model in the past, Megablitz would feature a tiny 3-car train and travel through 3 super intense large helixes. Mach Rides and Zamperla had dominated the powered coaster market for the last decade, but Disney would still trust Vekoma to build a one-off powered coaster as an update to a Disneyland classic. Casey Jr. Le Petit Train du Cirque would be a bit faster, but still tame version of the iconic ride at the now named Disneyland Paris, and would travel a similar landscape over a beautiful miniature storybook land. Interestingly, there would also be a third and final swinging turns in Grampus Jet at Greenland, but this ending would lead to a new generation of hanging coaster. Just 2 years before, a brand new Swiss manufacturer, Bolliger & Mabillard, would change the coaster world forever with the revolutionary Batman the Ride. Unlike Aero and Vekoma suspended coasters, this fixed train would not swing and be way more thrilling, being capable of completing many inversions. This model, as well as B&M's other smoother, sleeker tracked coasters, made the more janky Vekomas of the past look antiquated in comparison. While Vekoma had plenty of experience building their version of Aero coasters, they were stepping into a whole new ballpark when they attempted their own inverted coaster, which they called the suspended looping coaster. Their quickly made prototype would open as El Condor at Walibi Flavo, taking up a small footprint and matching Batman the Ride's height, speed, and inversions with 5. The brand new, too-wide train would also use far bulkier, comically large over-the-shoulder restraints, which allowed for even less visual freedom. The SLC would drop into a brand new, eye-catching inversion called a rollover, consisting of a sidewinder-like flip upwards and a second roll directly after, for a double flip in the air. After this, the coaster would fly through an elevated bank turn and a full sidewinder before a double inline twist finale. Unlike the classic corkscrews, the inline twists would be a tighter spiral and mimicked the zero-G roll B&M had developed for Batman. I also forgot to mention, the SLC was one of the worst tracking and roughest coasters made. Vekoma was not known for their smooth rides by any means, but the SLC in particular was an ambitious attempt at a highly thrilling ride that featured more advanced inversions than they had ever attempted before. But as you'll see, the cheaper price, and most importantly, mass production availability that they had shown over the years, would lead to this being nearly as popular as the Boomerang over the following decade. Vekoma would outdo themselves again in 1995 with another 16 coasters, including 2 more Boomerangs in South Korea and Uzbekistan. These would open alongside 5 more junior coasters, with 2 207-meter coasters and 3 custom indoor layouts. These would all go around rides inside the malls or parks, with the order of intensity going to the ones in Malaysia, Brazil, and Indonesia. But the real numbers would come from the explosion of the SLC, as 8 would open all around the world. The identical 662-meter layout used for El Condor would be repeated on T2 at Kentucky Kingdom, and all others this year would receive a slightly updated layout. The new version would feature a slightly taller height and an S-turn finale replacing the hill, and this modified 689-meter layout would open at 5 parks. I gotta say, the SLCs this year featured some incredible names, with Top Gun, F2 Fright Flight, Blackout, Mind Eraser, and Hangman. A very slightly modified version would be squeezed into Maury's Piers with the Great Nor'easter, making this technically a custom layout. On top of all of these, Lethal Weapon the Ride would open with a 4th 765-meter layout that would add a low helix before the brake run. But this abundance of coasters would pale to the final coaster of the year, which would be the 4th in a row at a Disney park and the 3rd in Paris. Since the inception of roller coasters, virtually all followed a traditional gravity path with a lift at either the beginning or end. As mentioned, in 1977, both Schwarzkopf and Aero would debut their singular looping shuttle coasters, with a launch propulsion system. Schwarzkopf would begin by using a weight drop system attached to a pulley, before changing to a flywheel with a similar effect. Arrows, on the other hand, would use a less powerful electric winch to drop the train off an elevated platform through a loop and back. Taking inspiration from the company who started it all for them, Vekoma would use the electric winch to develop their own launch for Space Mountain, de la Terre à la Lune. The traditional MK-1200 trains would not only be decorated in an incredible style, but would also feature onboard audio, a first for a large-scale coaster. The trains would rocket out of a jaw-dropping cannon into the indoor structure and through a long turn before a sidewinder. Trains would then continue to rocket along before a corkscrew and a small lift, before a unique element called the tongue, a cutback-like inversion. In terms of an overall package, Space Mountain may have been the most incredible coaster in the world at the time, with immaculate Jules Verne theming, cutting-edge technology, and a thrilling layout. The ride not only became Vekoma's biggest feather in their cap, but also saved the struggling Disneyland Paris, which the mouse certainly took note of. After another large rollout, Vekoma would have another prosperous year fleshing out their portfolio with another 13 coasters. The boomerangs just keep on coming, with installations in the US, Chile, and Brunei. Along with these would be yet another 689-meter SLC in Japan, as well as a second and final hurricane named Joker's Revenge at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. The junior coasters of the year would be made up by 2 more 207 meters in Germany and the UAE, and 4 more custom layouts. Vekoma would continue their relationship with Disney with Barnstormer at the Magic Kingdom, a slightly modified and mirrored 207-meter layout. The other 3 were more interesting, starting with Space Switchback. Located inside Shanghai's iconic Oriental Pearl Tower, this would drop right out of the station into another well-themed intergalactic layout before a lift hill to bring it back. Real Rat would open with a creepy sewer theme and a crazy lead car, with a basic indoor layout and a turn outside. The final would be Tatilia Express in Turkey, with to this day the longest layout Vekoma has ever done for a junior coaster, with 1,853 feet of track. This ride looks to be inspired by Zaire's large indoor Tivoli coasters, as the coaster snaked its way through the large indoor theme park. Along those tamer rides would be the second custom mine train coaster, Colorado Adventure at Phantasialand. Billed as the Michael Jackson thrill ride for the musician's love of the coaster, the train would wind in and around rockwork and buildings in Vekoma's new longest layout, surpassing 4,000 feet of track. The final of the year would be another new model which would look familiar at first glance. The mysterious X, No Way Out, would be the first Enigma coaster, using essentially junior coaster trains to travel backwards through a fully indoor layout in a pyramid. The basic layout would be plussed with lighting effects and music throughout, and go through different themes. To this point, Vekoma was on an absolute tear in terms of dominance in numbers in the coaster world. In their short 17 years of existence, they had installed over 100 coasters, averaging around 6 a year, but this next stretch of coasters over the next 3 years was truly something special. After constantly breaking their record for the most coasters in a year, they would hit a huge mark of 18 coasters for 1997. This would unsurprisingly include another 4 boomerangs in the United States, Brazil, and Egypt. After only 1 SLC the previous year, the model would return in a huge way, with 6 689-meter layouts around the world, and another 765-meter with Helix in Spain. Alongside those 7 SLCs would be an ever so slightly new layout, with the 787-meter extended on Pusing Lagi. The order of elements and stats are identical to the 765-meter, but features small tweaks given the park space. The junior coasters of the year would consist of one 335-meter and two 207s, along with two more custom layouts. These would be two more indoor coasters, with Montanha Russa in Portugal and the longer Extreme coaster in the Philippines. The final of the year would be yet another new model and a natural evolution of Vekoma's existing models. The Boomerang and SLC had proven to be their most successful thrilling coasters, so naturally, Vekoma would combine these two to create the Invertigo. Using the shuttle spikes, loop, and cobra roll layout of the Boomerang and the inverted trains and restraints of the SLC, this was a no-brainer of a model. To switch things up, each car would have back-to-back seating, allowing riders to face each other while completing the layout. After a bit of a delay, this would open as Hangover at Leesburg. Matching their incredible 18 coasters of the previous year, Vekoma would have another massive year, but with an even wider diversity of models in 1998. If your park didn't have a Boomerang yet, you would think it would have one now, with somehow 5 more opening in the United States, China, and Argentina. Along with the standards would be another Invertigo at Paramount's Great America and 3 more SLCs. A standard 689 meter would open at Geauga Lake, as well as 2 more 765 meters with Helix at Gardaland and Ratanga Junction. That park would also open a mine train clone of Calamity Mine with the 785-meter layout, as well as the first junior coaster of the year, a 335-meter. 1 more of these would open in China as well, and be joined by 4 more 207-meter layouts and 1 custom layout. Vapor Trail at Sesame Place would complete 3 helices before turning into the brakes. The big custom layout would come from a model not seen for nearly a decade, with a custom MK900 in Vogelrock at Efteling. Using the onboard audio of Space Mountain, the simple indoor layout would dodge giant birds with a fantasy theme. After nearly 40 coasters over the last 2 years, the demand for new rides could not be stopped, as for a 3rd year in a row, Vekoma would open an insane 18 coasters around the world. With roller coaster design evolving, Vekoma would say goodbye to one of their original models with the final custom MK1200. Millennium Roller Coaster would open a year before the new millennium at Fantasy Island in the UK. The 150-foot tall coaster would feature just 3 inversions, 2 loops and a sidewinder, and then snake above the flea market. After that would be yet another 2 boomerangs in Colorado and Texas, as well as already the last 2 Invertigo coasters at Six Flags America and Paramount's Kings Island. After another slower year for the SLC, another 7 would open, including 6 more 689-meter layouts. These would have another roster of great names, including Limit, Serial Thriller, and Traumatizer. Also opening would be the 5th and final 765-meter with Helix, simply named Roller Coaster at Dream Island in Egypt. That park would also open 2 junior coasters, including the 2nd and final Enigma named Dark Ride. This ride begins with 2 lift hills before many helixes in the dark, and is joined by the 335-meter Family Coaster, one of the 2 for the year, along with Woodstock Express at Cedar Point. The other junior coasters would be the 207-meter Woody Woodpecker's Nuthouse Coaster at Universal Studios Florida and custom Dragon at the new Legoland California, which would begin with a small dark ride segment before a simple terrain-hugging layout. The final of the year and the decade would be another major coaster for Vekoma's new favorite customer, Disney. In the time since Space Mountain had opened, many other manufacturers had begun to experiment with launch coasters, and they found the new most reliable method was using magnets. Vekoma would attempt a version of this on Rock and Roller Coaster at Disney's MGM Studios, and unlike Space Mountain, it would use a flat LSM launch with a catch car to reach a much faster 57 miles per hour. This would rocket into a brand new element called a sea serpent roll, which would enter similar to a cobra roll, but exit the second sidewinder in an opposite direction, continuing the path rather than turning the train around. After that, the coaster would complete many turns indoors, as well as a corkscrew, while having onboard audio of Aerosmith blasting through the chaotic layout. This huge thrilling coaster at a Disney park would be yet another win for Vekoma, and conclude an unbelievable decade of 116 new roller coasters around the world. As the world turned to a new century and the coaster wars were at their absolute peak, Vekoma found themselves in the most unique position of any roller coaster manufacturer. On one hand, they were far and away the biggest manufacturer in terms of diversity of models and production capability. On the other, all other manufacturers had greatly improved track and train designs through the 90s, leaving their antiquated Aero-style track and profiling in the dust. Heck, even Aero themselves would fall into bankruptcy in a few years due to their unwillingness to innovate at the right time. While obviously coasters were still flying out of the factory at an incredible rate for them, they would need to start changing things, as eventually, parks would stop buying boomerangs and SLCs. But that would obviously start after 2000, as somehow 4 more boomerangs opened in Missouri, Germany, Israel, and the Netherlands. They would also open another 689-meter SLC with Batman the Ride at Six Flags Mexico, and another slate of junior coasters. This year, 4 207 meters and 2 335 meters. This all seemed fairly standard so far, but Vekoma did have 3 big coasters planned to bring them into the coaster future. The first would be a clone of the popular Rockin' Roller Coaster the year before, with Superman the Ride at Six Flags Holland, this time located outdoors so the twisted layout could be better appreciated. The park would also open a coaster that would go in the complete opposite direction of what you would expect with Vekoma, as Robin Hood would be their first wooden coaster. While the wood coaster world had advanced massively through the 90s, with CCI, DIN, and RCCA, the massive rides weren't always the smoothest. Vekoma's would also not be the smoothest, but feature an out-and-back layout that didn't rattle about too much. The final coaster of the year would be no simple wooden coaster though, as Vekoma would build a truly brand new concept. B&M and Vekoma had proved how popular their inverted coasters could be through the last decade, but Vekoma would take that concept a step further to give a true sensation of flight. The Dutch company would debut a model known as the Flying Dutchman, with Stealth at Paramount's Great America opening as the world's first flying coaster. After loading into a somewhat standard train with a large padded vest and lap bars, riders would be tilted to lay on their backs in the station and travel headfirst up the lift hill. After reaching the top, the track would flip over, dangling riders under the track with only the ground below for a brand new open sensation, taking riders from lie to fly. After a drop into a horseshoe-shaped turn, the ride would go back from fly to lie and through a vertical loop before going back to flying. The coaster would then fly into a double corkscrew finale, which were awkwardly shaped identically to the traditional corkscrews found on the sit-down coasters, before gliding headfirst into the brakes. As far as a prototype model, the new coaster had smoother and more fun transitions and shaping to their suspended looping coasters, but the new trains proved to be a maintenance nightmare for the model going forward. The next year would see a natural progression of new models, while also going back to the mass production and matching their most coasters for a year with 18. Cobra would open at Six Flags Belgium as, you're not gonna believe this, the 42nd boomerang around the world, alongside one of 2 wood coasters from the previous year. Loop Guru would have an identical track length and speed to Robin Hood, but stand slightly shorter and complete a more simple oval layout. The other would be Thunder Coaster at Norway's Tusenfryd, which had slightly less length but a much higher top speed and a more interesting layout, more similar to the new GCI coasters at the time. The coaster began with a large swooping drop before many fast-paced and highly banked hills with smaller pops of airtime and laterals. These three would end up being the only wooden coasters Vekoma would ever produce, as more companies such as GCI and later Gravity Group would essentially take the reins as wood coaster demand slowed. Moving on to the junior coasters, there would be three more 335 meters in Italy, Taiwan, and the Netherlands, a 207 meter in California, and a custom layout with Ochterbahn at Toverland. This indoor coaster circled rides and play structures as the first coaster at this now large park. There would also be a ride simply named Roller Coaster in South Africa, with a custom layout at the time, but would later be known as the 247 meter coaster. Be sure to remember this ride for later. While Vekoma had advanced the design of their junior coasters for the last decade, they were about to reach a new evolution with the introduction of a new model. After building dozens of large-scale thrilling suspended looping coasters, they decided to scale the model down to create the suspended family coaster. This base model, the 342 meter, would debut at two Paramount parks, Kings Island and Canada's Wonderland, with layouts less than 50 feet tall. The basic ride would complete slow helixes and dips that would have been perfect for children, but unfortunately retained the poor tracking of their larger coasters, making these surprisingly rough rides. Those family suspended coasters would be joined by a pair of 689-meter suspended looping coasters in Germany and Israel, and two more Flying Dutchman coasters. These would open at two Six Flags parks, with X-Flight at Worlds of Adventure in Ohio and Batwing at America in Maryland. They would both use the same 1,018-meter layout, identical to the 843-meter prototype the previous year, but with a proper outward-facing double inline twist finale and an extra helix at the end. Like the wood coasters though, these two models would only see 3 installations each, with the problematic concept being improved greatly the following year with B&M's Air at Alton Towers, making these Vekoma dart throws ultimately unsuccessful. It wouldn't all be down though, as Vekoma would have one more suspended coaster innovation for the year. After the Invertigo model failed to catch on a few years earlier, Vekoma would certainly go big instead of going home with the giant inverted boomerang. This ambitious model would be the manufacturer's tallest and fastest coaster yet, and use a larger 4-wide train than they had used before, with unique staggered seating. Still using the Cobra roll and loop, these trains would instead be hoisted up massive 177-foot vertical spikes before flying through the layout with the loop now over the station. This would open as Deja Vu at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This would open as Deja Vu at Six Flags Over Georgia. This would open as Deja Vu at Six Flags Great America. Wait. These 3 coasters each stood tall over their respective parks, and while they still weren't the smoothest of rides, the intense layout became a fan favorite among many coaster enthusiasts. After years of extreme mass production, Vekoma and the rest of the industry would wind back down to earth as the peak of the coaster wars was coming to a close. 2002 would still have a slate of 8 coasters, and their first year since 1994 where all were different models and layouts. Most importantly, for the first time in nearly 20 years, this would be the first year without any new boomerangs. While the model had clearly run its course, its longevity is certainly commendable, and it wouldn't be the end either. Starting the year off would be a 207-meter junior, a third suspended family coaster at Australia's Dreamworld, and then a third and final rock and roller coaster. This would feature the original name at Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris, but a new theme, and become the second launched Vekoma coaster at this resort. Happy Valley Shenzhen would open another 785-meter mine train coaster, as well as the first of two SLC coasters for the year. Snow Mountain Flying Dragon would not feature the cloned layout of the past, but a brand new 671-meter layout. Standing slightly taller than the standard, this would be a more modernized layout, with elements more similar to their contemporary B&M. Dropping straight into a low turn, the coaster would fly through a vertical loop and cobra roll before a first element for Vekoma, a 0G roll. This weightless element was standard on almost every Bolliger and Mabillard inverted coaster and would be followed by a high elevated turn before the brake run. The other SLC would also be a new layout, as Fantasy Island would receive another custom looper to pair with Millennium. Jubilee Odyssey would be taller, longer, and faster than any SLC before it, and drop into another loop and cobra roll as well. After a high turnaround, the coaster would soar through a sidewinder before a nice wing-over corkscrew finale. Along with those large suspended coasters would be another giant inverted boomerang, Stuntfall at Warner Bros. Park Madrid, and one more brand new model for the year. As the classic MK1200 track style was fading into irrelevance for more modern rides, Vekoma would attempt one final effort to revive the model. Using an updated and more open train, Gravity Max would begin up a standard 114-foot lift before the unthinkable would happen. Reaching the end of the lift, the track would just end before the entire track was tilted 90 degrees straight down. The train would then release and complete an admittedly very basic layout into a tunnel before a single loop and helix before the brake run. As far as a prototype model, this tilt coaster would be ingrained in the minds of people around the world for this one-of-a-kind, mind-blowing element, but again, it would be a model that would never catch on. Even more scaled back than the previous year, the 5 coasters of 2003 would have no new models, but continue to flesh out worldwide offerings. Duval Train would be yet another 207-meter junior coaster in France, along with 2 more family suspended coasters at Paramount's Carowinds and Wild Adventures in the US. Joining those would be 2 more SLCs, a standard 689-meter Titanide in Spain, and the second and final, larger 787-meter extended suspended looping coaster in China. "2004 would be a year of going back to basics, while still having minor updates to classic concepts. The Boomerang would return with 2 installations in Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, as well as another 689-meter SLC in Arkansas. The more interesting rides of the year would actually be the junior coasters, as the trains which had been standard for 15 years would see a slight update with new individual lap bars that would first debut at Bobbejaanland Land. Okie Dokie would have a custom layout that would drop over a lake before more turns and drops along the water. This train would also debut on the 335-meter Okeechobee Rampage at Cypress Gardens, along with the family suspended Swamp Thing. The year would see a new model as well, and be another entirely new coaster concept from Vekoma. In a brand new seating arrangement, riders would straddle a bike with a back restraint and be sat on motorcycle-themed trains. This leaned-over position really sold the booster bike concept, along with the new hydraulic launch system that followed. Intamin had created this system a few years before, providing a quick acceleration of 0 to 46 miles per hour in 3 seconds. The bikes would then zoom through fast-paced low-to-the-ground turns before a couple bunny hills to end the ride. This small, novel concept again would not be perfected by Vekoma, but inspired plenty of manufacturers to create similar style rides in the future. The next year would have another 6 coasters, including another boomerang with Cobra at Finland's Power Park. This featured trains similar to Gravity Max, sitting higher on the track and with more open sides. This would be followed by a seventh and final 342-meter suspended family coaster with Bat at Lagoon, along with 2 custom junior coasters in Asia. Herky and Timmy's Racing Coaster would be a basic layout with a few gentle turns at Korea's Everland, along with the simply named roller coaster at China's Amazing Park. This would be one of the longest junior coaster layouts, with over 1,800 feet to circle around the indoor park before a helix outside. Velocity would open at Flamingo Land as the second booster bike, with a similar but slightly custom layout to the original 600-meter, with a slightly longer track length and top speed. The last of the year would be Vekoma's 10th coaster for Disney, and be the last Space Mountain built. This would not be the intense looping layout in Paris, but instead the classic version from Disneyland, which was in the process of being redone by Dynamic Attractions at the same time. This would open at the new Hong Kong Disneyland, with the same trains and onboard audio that was being installed on the California version, but with more modern lighting effects than any Space Mountain yet. – 2006 would see 6 coasters again, including 4 in Asia. Rolling Hills would be a 335-meter junior in Turkmenistan, and China would see Jungle Racing, a 785-meter mine train, and motorbike launch coaster, a second and final 600-meter booster bike. There would be 2 SLCs for the year, both with the updated layout, beginning with Kumali with the second and only other 671-meter layout at Flamingo Land. The other, Golden Wings over the snowfield, would have the same layout, but an extra helix before the brake run, making this a new 748-meter model. The final coaster of the year would be yet another for Disney, and this time another innovative behemoth of a ride. Animal Kingdom had opened 8 years before, with only one truly thrilling ride in the simulator Dinosaur. The park was ready to not just add a big coaster, but the most expensive ever in Expedition Everest. This would bring the mine train into the 21st century, with higher-sitting individual lap bar trains, and travel through a massive mountain range of the Himalayas. After a small, low-to-the-ground section, the trains would climb towards the Forbidden Mountain, before stopping at a piece of destroyed track. With seemingly nowhere to go, the trains would then roll backwards, due to a high-tech switch track which rotated to bring passengers into the mountain for an intense helix. After stopping for another show scene, the train would careen down the largest drop before an encounter with the most advanced animatronic ever built of a massive Yeti. The epic $100 million coaster would be yet another landmark for Vekoma and Disney, and another smooth coaster for Vekoma's portfolio. After years of coaster production unrivaled by any manufacturer, seeing Vekoma only build 2 coasters for the first time in 25 years was certainly surprising to see in 2007. These would both be second attempts of the suspended family coasters, with both featuring brand new lap bar only trains which greatly increase comfort for kids. The first would be known as the 294-meter on Jimmy Neutron's Atomic Flyer at Movie Park, Germany. This used a flat, spineless track to complete a simple layout with a large helix at the end. The second was Kvasten at Gronelund, with a larger height and track with a spine similar to the other junior coasters. This 395-meter model would dive under another coaster, along water, and through a figure 8 over pathways before a helix finale. Thankfully, the consensus was both of these rides were far better and more comfortable than their predecessors, something Vekoma definitely needed after decades of not making the smoothest coasters. – 2008 would see another 5 coasters, beginning with 2 at the infamous Hard Rock Park. Shake, Rattle, and Roller Coaster is listed as a custom layout, but looks to be a 207 meter, and Eagle's Life in the Fast Lane is similar, listed as custom, but similar to the standard 785 meter mine train. Mammoth at Gardaland would be another custom mine train with 3 lift hills and weaving through snowy rockwork with a prehistoric theme. Steel Lasso would open at Frontier City as the second and final of the 294 meter updated suspended layout, as the 395 meter would be chosen to move forward as the better of the two. The last of the year would be the unique Montaña Rusa, standing hundreds of feet over Barcelona at the picturesque Tibidabo. After not being used for a decade, the coaster would interestingly use the custom MK900 trains, but is listed as its own new model, and follow a terrain layout along the hillside. This would be a good experiment for Vekoma, as more than anything, they needed to start building fun and smooth coasters, and this fast-paced outdoor layout would be well received by park guests. The next year, Vekoma would debut a coaster so incredible, so groundbreaking, the park would simply name it Innovative Roller Coaster. This would be the 17th 335 meter junior coaster in the world. This and the 18th 335 meter would open in Sweden, along with a custom junior coaster at Haiyu Dreamland in China. Shell's Shuttle would be the second longest junior coaster, and the only to feature 2 lift hills. This would tour the indoor mall and circle rides, including a large carousel. Next would be Dragon and Snowfield, a 785 meter mine train, and Dragon and Clouds, the second and again last 748 meter SLC with the extra helix. There would be a large one-of-a-kind ride for the year as well, and another attempt to revive a model that failed in the past. After their large train and sprawling flying coaster layouts of the past, the Stingray would feature a short 2-car, 8-passenger train and travel a compact layout in a super small footprint. Using an almost identical but updated seat and restraint style with rubber vests, the coaster would still tilt riders back and then climb a vertical lift. After a super steep drop, the ride would soar upwards over an extremely banked hammerhead turn over water, with well-engineered supports. The ride would then fly through an oddly shaped Immelman-like roll, before turning and diving headfirst into the brake run. While a novel concept for a smaller alternative flying coaster, it still wasn't the answer, and Vekoma would have to go back to the drawing board again for this model. The 2010s would begin with another 2 335-meter layouts in Israel and at the brand new Universal Studios Singapore. These would be joined by 3 more custom junior coasters, starting with Babylon at Russia's Happy Lawn. No videos of the ride could be found, but it looked to be another coaster that would travel around an indoor park with small dips. The second would be Voltron at Planeta Prima in Guatemala. This would be far larger than Babylon, but complete another scenic, compact layout around the mall and over play structures. The final would be Dark Ride at EDA Park in Taiwan. The coaster would drop out of the station before a dark, fast-paced layout through the mouths of monsters before a large lift back to the station. Also at EDA Park would be a brand new model, and a bizarre one at that. Originally planned to open in Orlando in the late 90s, this coaster and model, known simply as Big Air, would surprisingly be Vekoma's tallest coaster to this day. Essentially combining the giant inverted boomerang and sort of Intamin's half-pipe coasters, this would technically be Vekoma's first spinning coaster. 2 massive joined cars, awkwardly seating 12 riders, with restraints similar to Gravity Max, would be hoisted up a massive vertical spike. After reaching the top, the trains would rotate to face the ground, and then drop up and down the U-shaped half-pipe. The train would then be caught and be brought back up to the top before rotating back forward and dropping again. While the coaster was tall and fast, better shuttle coasters on the market led to this being the only installation of this model, and even worse, the spinning function has been disabled for years. But much more successful and exciting would be the headline attraction at Universal Studios Singapore, Battlestar Galactica. After building 3 successful Bolliger and Mabillard coasters, Universal began experimenting with different manufacturers for their next few large coasters. Evoking the design of Universal's previous double B&M inverted dueling dragons, Vekoma would use one inverted intertwined with the more standard sit-down layout. More importantly than that, this would be Vekoma's first LSM launch coaster, using 2 parallel lifts to accelerate the trains through the layout. The red sit-down side, known as Human, would use a 4-wide train with seats from the family suspended coasters, and complete a generally tame layout with no inversions. The real star of the show would be the blue inverted side, Cylon. While Vekoma had years of experience building suspended looping coasters, this would be a total reinvention, with updated track and most significantly, 4 wide B&M-like trains. On those trains would be a new vest design, eliminating the headbang issue for so many of their previous coasters, and would soon become the new standard on all their thrill coasters going forward. The coaster would complete a cobra roll, corkscrew, loop, and zero-G roll, with humans circling around for many dynamic near-miss elements. While Vekoma still wasn't quite there yet to make this the best coaster it could be, Universal's trust in them would give them the confidence to go into the future with larger, smoother, and genuinely great coasters to come. The next decade would begin with the basics of another 2 335-meter layouts in Turkey and Italy's Rainbow Magic Land. That park would also get a custom mine train named Olandis Volant, with 2 lifts and many dips and turns. A pair of coasters would open in China, including the first giant inverted boomerang in nearly a decade at Jinjiang Action Park and the last traditional motorbike coaster at Happy World. This custom indoor layout would launch out of the mall and over a hill, and into a turn back indoors around the small rides in the park. The final 2 coasters would be a new model, which would combine Vekoma's 2 most popular layouts into one. Bringing the back and forth shuttle sensation to children, the family boomerang would debut as Ben 10 Ultimate Mission at Drayton Manor and simply Boomerang at Parc des Combes. The standard junior coaster trains would be brought backwards up a spike with drive tires before dropping through the station into a simple figure-8 layout and up a spike with a hump parallel to the lift, and complete the course in reverse. This original 185-meter layout was again a move in the right direction for Vekoma to evolve with another smooth and unique coaster perfect for families. "2012 would begin with, 'No, I thought this was over.' After 6 years and seemingly the end of the over 30-year-old design, the Boomerang would return with Stress Express at Fantawild Adventure. The only saving grace would be this being the first standard coaster to feature the new vest restraints for a smoother ride, beginning a new wave of boomerangs. The only other coaster of the year would be a good one at least, with a welcome return to working with Disney. Like their last project, this would be the second and final large-scale mine train, as an addition to Hong Kong Disneyland. Big Grizzly Mountain runaway mine cars would not feature the massive mountain of Expedition Everest, but rather stay low to the ground and carve through mine trenches. The coaster would drop straight out of the station into some twists, before a lift and the first introduction to animatronic bears who would cause mischief throughout the course. After some faster turns, the train would climb a second lift, before a cable seemingly breaks, dropping the train through an extended backwards section with a switch track. After pausing for another short show scene, the train would complete a quick LIM launch into a fast-paced low-to-the-ground section through trenches, geysers, and rockwork before returning to the station. The next year would begin with yet another vest restraint boomerang at Fantawild Dreamland, followed by 3 inverted coasters. Freedom Flyer would open at Fun Spot Orlando as a family inverted coaster with the 395-meter layout of Kavastan, and would be joined by Orkanen at Farup Summerland. While it took Vekoma many years to get their tracking right, this new 453-meter layout would finally perfect the model's smoothness and feature an exciting layout with a drop underwater into a steep overbank turn, followed by more gentle twists after. The final would be a new model and the only installation of its kind. A few attempts were made in the early 2000s of small inverted coasters with water guns equipped, marketed as a ride between riders and bystanders. Vekoma would revive this concept for the Yas Waterworld water park in Abu Dhabi, with a much more advanced and well-built coaster than the similar rides before it. Small 4-passenger trains would equip each rider with laser guns, which were able to blast targets around the course to drench onlookers, as well as containing a large water tank at the front of the train, which could dump on guests on the ground. The layout itself would feature 2 lift hills and fly over water slides, paths, rivers, and pools in a fantastic family-pleasing attraction. Also, because I know people will ask and I'm not sure where else to put this, now seems like a good time to discuss the mysterious Dive Pretzel Coaster model. Planned to open along with a custom motorbike coaster at the Great Mall of China, this model looked to be Vekoma's attempt at a combination of a Gerstlauer Eurofighter, a Schwarzkopf Looper, and the Intamin Space Diver. Seen with 4-across seating similar to Human on Battlestar Galactica, this coaster would begin up a vertical lift, but the layout after remains a mystery, with many conflicting layout concepts online. The status of both of these coasters remains unknown, with the track seen at Vekoma's factory in 2017, but no knowledge of what happened since. "2014 would sadly see the last giant inverted boomerang installed, with Quantum Leap at Russia's Sochi Park, as well as Vekoma's last coaster for Universal with the 335-meter Flight of the Hippogriff at Universal Studios Japan. More junior coasters would open around Asia, with another 395-meter suspended in South Korea and the next family boomerang in India. The major coaster of the year would be yet another coaster for Disney, Vekoma's 12th for the company. Seven Dwarfs Mine Train would open at Magic Kingdom with yet another reinvention of the classic model. This time, the trains would rock side to side to give the sensation of being in ore cars, in cute 20-passenger trains. The coaster would dip out of the station into a lift before some swinging turns lead into a show scene with the 7 little men. After climbing another lift, the trains would double down into a slightly faster section to swing the trains a bit more before the finale at the cottage. The Vest Boomerangs would continue into 2015 with 2 more Stress Express coasters in China before a handful of junior coasters, including 2 at Vin Wonders in Vietnam. Ocean Train Coaster would be the first 207-meter junior in over a decade, and Flying Dolphin Coaster would be another family boomerang with an either cute or creepy lead car, depending on who you're asking. The 453-meter suspended coaster would see 2 more installations, with Galaxy Express in China, but more importantly, audiences in Poland would be introduced to Dragon Roller Coaster at Energylandia. This would be the first of many Vekoma coasters at this new park, and would be joined this year by Energis, a 335-meter junior, and Roller Coaster Mayan, the first standard SLC in a while. Thankfully, this and Death Rail at Al Zawra Land would both feature the new vest restraints at least. The stress would not stop in 2016, with yet another 2 Stress Express boomerangs, followed by 2 more 395-meter suspended family coasters in Ukraine and England. This year would also introduce 2 new family boomerang layouts, with the new 208-meter opening first on Velociraptor at Paultons Park, with a drop through and over the station before a spike in the opposite direction of the lift. The second would be custom and open in the brand new land of Klugheim at Phantasialand, wrapping around a section of the incredible Intamin coaster Terran. Sharing the same dark color scheme of the High Thrill coaster, the trains would rise into a small building and drop into a twisting hill before a quick low-to-the-ground section and a spike parallel to the lift. Mine Adventure would be another 785-meter mine train at Vin Pearl Land, and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train would be a clone of the coaster a few years before, but at the brand new Shanghai Disneyland. Joining Seven Dwarfs would be Tron Light Cycle Power Run, a revival of the booster bike coaster from the past, but with an LSM launch. Featuring more advanced but uncomfortable trains, riders would blast 60 miles per hour into a large turn outside, before returning inside the grid for some turns with fun screen effects to mimic racing other bikes. The largest coaster of the year would be yet another at Energylandia, and possibly be Vekoma's biggest coaster yet. After years of improving every aspect of their coaster's comfort, trains, and smoothness, and observing how other manufacturers such as Intamin, RMC, and Mach had been squeezing more elements into compact layouts, it was their time to unveil their splash in the industry. Utilizing a brand new 2x2 train chassis and new restraints with vests, really showing just how far Vekoma had come, the train would pull into a tunnel with a bunch of Formula One driver figures. Smoke pours in and the train accelerates to 50 miles per hour into a sidewinder before perhaps Vekoma's first element designed for pure airtime. After charging through a corkscrew, the train would complete another unique element, an outer banked hill, which had only been done by Rocky Mountain Construction before, which would dump the trains in the opposite way. After a final corkscrew, the trains would complete a couple more final hills and turns before the brakes. This new smooth, intense, and compact space warp layout gave parks around the world a taste of what a new generation of design could look like from this much laughed at company, and opened the door for Vekoma to build larger and more ambitious layouts in the future. Before we start talking about 2017, we have to go way back in time. Remember the junior coaster in South Africa with the 247-meter layout back in 2001? Of course you don't. But anyway, that coaster would close around 2008 and would be relocated to Kid City in Indonesia with the name Crazy Cab Coaster in 2015. Apparently, this coaster was the most incredible thing Indonesia had ever seen, because 2 years later, a staggering 15 would open all across the country at various Kid City and Trans Studio mini parks. 7 of these would be named Crazy Cab Coaster, with another 7 named Crazy Taxi Coaster, and the final being named just Crazy Coaster. These would all sport the red, yellow, and blue color scheme of the relocated coaster, with more modern taxi-themed trains. These would all have fairly similar theming, but most strikingly, all would do a turn that would go outside the upstairs indoor parks. How Vekoma was able to produce all these coasters for 1 year, I don't know, but even more crazy they weren't done, with another 10 coasters opening on top of that. Many of these would be junior coasters, with 2 more 335 meters in Vietnam and China, as well as another 4 family boomerangs. Another of the original 185-meter layout would open in China, along with 3 more of the new 208-meter layout in Sweden, the UAE, and Energylandia. 3 suspended coasters would open, with Little Dragon's Flight using the 395-meter junior layout in Vietnam, Galaxy Express with the newer 453-meter layout in China, and Queen Cobra, the last ever suspended looping coaster, would open with the most common 689-meter layout at Vietnam's Asia Park. While these 24 coasters for the year already shattered Vekoma's record for their most in a year, their final coaster, and the only one with a custom layout of the year, would put a true exclamation point on 2017. While Energylandia was getting all of the company's attention in Poland, a small park named Legendia an hour away sought to make a statement for themselves. Challenging Vekoma to build their most intense layout yet, Let Coaster would be a perfect experiment for Vekoma to keep innovating with a new model they called the Bermuda Blitz. Using the same trains as Formula but with a lift hill, this would outdo the Space Warp in every stat and begin with an absolutely wild, steep twisting drop into a cave. The train would then rocket through a reverse sidewinder and 2 airtime hills before a fast corkscrew through the station. With intensity turned up to 11, the train would then fly through more hills and turns and a final corkscrew before charging into the brakes. While the ride gave coaster enthusiasts the ferocity they crave, Vekoma learned this may be their limit, as while this was still potentially their best coaster to date, everything after would turn down the intensity to a more comfortable and fun level. Indonesia realized they still didn't have enough 247-meter junior coasters, so in 2018, 5 more would open with the Crazy Taxi or Crazy Cab theme. Along with those would be the classics, another Stress Express boomerang in China, and another, potentially final, 785-meter mine train named Lost Valley at Vietnam's Vin Wonders. That park would also receive another 453-meter suspended family coaster named Desert Twister, and across the world in Mexico, the final 395-meter suspended coaster would open on top of a mall named Insomnio. Finally, this year would see a custom family boomerang layout, and this time it would not just be one coaster, but 2 intertwined. Tweestreed would open at the Wildlands Adventure Zoo, and take both trains backwards up the lifts with parallel spikes. After dropping, the trains would turn in opposite directions into a head-to-head flyby before going up 2 more parallel spikes and completing the layout in reverse. "2019 would begin with maybe, hopefully, finally, the last boomerang ever installed with another Stress Express at Silk Road Dreamland. 35 years after the model had been introduced and 53 installations later, the original layout that put Vekoma on the map may finally be over, bringing its old track and train style with it. Poetic, really, as this end of an era would be met with another year of embracing the future and modern, smooth, and incredible designs. This would begin with somehow 4 more 247-meter crazy taxis in Indonesia, bringing the total to 25 across the country. Energylandia would see all of these and go, sure, we'll take one too, making Frida the 6th Vekoma in the park and the 4th junior-style coaster. These junior coasters would be joined by a 335-meter in China, a 208-meter family boomerang in Vietnam, and 2 more 453-meter suspended family coasters at Dollywood and Oriental Heritage. This wouldn't be all for the Chinese park, as they would debut a new model as a follow-up to the Bermuda Blitz from years before. This model would be named the Hyper Space Warp and begin with an identical layout to the original Space Warp formula from years before, but with a chain lift instead of a launch. Instead of hitting the brakes after a steep turn, the train would complete 3 more banking hills and dive underground to keep the momentum. This would be named Celestial Gauntlet, with another opening as Flying Dragon at Oriental Legend as well. As Vekoma moved into the modern era, not even a pandemic could slow them down, with 9 coasters opening around the world. Good things never die, including the 335-meter junior coaster with another installation in China, before 2 more 453-meter suspended family coasters in China and Vietnam. This year would see a slate of 3 more family boomerangs, starting with a 208-meter in China before 2 new layouts. Savin would open at Faroop Summerland with a new 238-meter layout. Rather than the compact layout featured on almost all these models so far, this would go far out over multiple hills before the spike with a hump and falling back. The final would be the custom Volodamth at Erlebens Park Tripstrill with a very similar layout to the 238-meter, but with a very uniquely shaped spike, and wrapped around Vekoma's next coaster of the year. After retiring the SLC a couple years before and improving the smoothness and comfort of their family suspended coasters, Vekoma was ready to reboot the model with the suspended thrill coaster. This new STC, named Hals über Kopf, would use the same open and comfortable trains of the family coasters and climb up a modest, under 100-foot lift. After dropping into a smooth, low roll over Volodamp Station, it's clear this would be far different than any thrilling inverted coaster before it, as the layout is more focused on hills with negative Gs rather than the inversions and positive forces like all of their installations before it. While just a prototype for the model, the smooth coaster serves as a perfect reboot of the invert and a way to differentiate themselves from the layouts of their contemporaries. Following this would be yet another new model, and Vekoma's second thrilling LSM launch coaster. Actually the second installation of this model, as the first was built but left standing but not operating in China around 2018, Wrath of Zeus would open with the Firestorm layout. Featuring a slightly longer 5-car train, this would launch into Vekoma's first ever top hat, and a super weird shaped one at that, reaching 164 feet and doing a full twist on the way down. Much like Hals über Kopf, this would then have its inversions with 2 corkscrews and a loop, but be much more airtime focused, with straight hills, S-hills, and back-to-back off-axis airtime hills. These 2 would take second and third on the podium to Vekoma's best of the year though, as they had yet another reinvention of a former model, but this time a far more drastic do-over of their Flying Dutchman. Opening as Vekoma's second longest coaster behind Colorado Adventure at Phantasialand, that same park would again work with the manufacturer to build their most impressive ride to date. After pushing Intamin to fit a next-generation thrilling coaster Terran into a compact footprint, the park would open Fly, in a new area named Rookburg. This deluxe coaster would load guests upright along a wall, before moving past a show scene and seamlessly rotating into the flying position, before an LSM launch into the steampunk city. While still having 2 corkscrew inversions, this flying coaster would be the first to focus more on negative Gs, floating over hills and then diving through countless near-miss elements. The incredible immersive experience wrapping around shops, restaurants, and an entire hotel became another headline attraction for this park, and another massive hit in an excellent year for Vekoma. With the world still facing travel restrictions, Vekoma would still manage to open 15 coasters globally, including more of their largest and best yet. The classic 207-meter Junior would see an installation in Qatar, and the new classic 247-meter another installation in Armenia. Along with those, a custom layout named Crazy Race would open at the long-delayed Respublika in Ukraine. It looks to be a classic indoor model, going through the mall and around a drop tower. Orochi would open as another 453-meter suspended family coaster, and would be joined by finally another layout for this model with Phoenix. Opening at Dino's Wonder Wheel at the Coney Island Boardwalk, this 375-meter coaster would stand slightly taller but have a shorter track length than the more popular model, and complete many smooth dips and turns on a compact square footprint. A quartet of 208-meter family boomerangs would open in Armenia and China, with two being named Frontline Express at two parks both named Fanta Park Glorious Orient. These parks would also each receive one of the new layouts of the year in a compact LSM launch model called the Top Gun. The name fits these coasters named Fighter Jet, as the station and launch track are made to look like an aircraft carrier, and your compact two-car train is the plane taking off. Launching straight into a brand new element called the Rollover Camelback, this element would twist up the ascent before leveling back out at the top, similar to a non-inverting loop, before dropping down and charging over a hill. After that, the train would rise into an oddly shaped sidewinder and snake down a corkscrew before some turns into a mid-course. The train would then drop into a roll before some hops and turns into the brake run. China's love of Vekoma wouldn't end there, with another hyperspace warp in the Stag's Gauntlet, and the introduction of yet another new LSM launch model with the Shockwave. Statistically between the Space Warp and the Firestorm, this layout would stand out from the others with the inversion count, with 5. These would include a loop, 2 corkscrews, and a batwing, Vekoma's third after Guderiks and Kamikaze, along with more airtime hills and turns. These elements on Jungle Dragon, plus an abundance of tunnels and location over water, made this another eye-catching and popular coaster for Vekoma. But they would outdo themselves again, as their favorite customer, Energylandia, would add another 2 coasters, including another large thrilling layout. Even though they already had a family boomerang, Light Explorers would open with the new 238-meter layout in the brand new land of Aqualantis, with the other new coaster, Abyssus. Featuring half of the layout of the Shockwave, this coaster would be a multi-launch coaster, and beat Colorado Adventure to become Vekoma's new longest coaster. The train would roll right out of the station into a small boost, with some tight turns and hills, almost like a pre-lift, before the main launch. After that, the layout would be identical to Jungle Dragon, only eliminating the final inversion. "2022 would begin with another new park in China with the combo of a Top Gun fighter jet coaster and a junior coaster named Frontline Charge, this time being a standard 335-meter model, and perhaps the last. Just like almost every Vekoma model which is being rebooted at this time, the 207-meter and the 335-meter layouts, which have been around for over 30 years, may finally begin to be phased out for a handful of new junior coasters for this year and beyond. Saudi Arabia would open their own taxi-themed 247-meter, and Dino Dash would be the first of a new model named the Calypso. Statistically similar to the 247-meter, this model would begin with a swooping drop into a fast-paced layout, with more modern banking and profiling to junior coasters of the past. These would be met by 3 more of the now familiar 208-meter family boomerang in China and Qatar, as well as 2 453-meter family suspended coasters in China and Australia. This year wouldn't be without new high-thrill coasters though, as 2 new lift hill models would be introduced. The smaller would be the Renegade, opening on Invincible Warriors in China, standing under 100 feet, but still packing in an exciting layout with a steep turning drop. This would be followed by a first-of-its-kind element for Vekoma, an extremely quick stall. While more of a cutback than the sustained hang time other manufacturers were starting to introduce, this quick element would still be followed by plenty of airtime hills and 2 corkscrews through a well-paced layout. The larger of the 2 would be known as the Wildcat, and open at a park with many Vekomas before it in Farup Summerland. Phoenix would have a straight drop into a true stalling element, a large inside top hat, followed by a far wilder layout with pacing more similar to Let Coaster than some of the other newer models. A Heartline roll and corkscrew would be mixed in with over a dozen airtime hills of the straight and off-axis variety, as well as quick turns and wave stalls. The final coaster of the year would be yet another for Disney, but this time the first coaster at the iconic Epcot. While Abyssus would just beat Colorado Adventure's length, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind would blow Vekoma's own record even further out of the water, with over a mile long, 5,577 feet of track, to become not only their longest, but the new longest indoor coaster in the world. This would be done with an entirely new model, as Vekoma's first true spinning coaster. These spacious trains would not just be free spinning, but controlled and be made to face riders in any way possible. Beginning with a small show scene and a 60-mile-per-hour backwards LSM launch, the train would snake down the massive track with maybe their smoothest profiling yet, seamlessly rotating, and paired with onboard audio of rock music and the Marvel heroes for one of the most fun coasters ever made. The new generation of smooth coasters would continue, with 2023 seeing the first year with all unique layouts in nearly a decade. Circus Carnival would open at Oriental Heritage as another hyperspace warp, along with Pine Tree Rocket, another 208-meter family boomerang. Another family boomerang would open with a custom layout, with Leesburg's Luna hopping over and around many rides at this beautiful compact park. The Pine Tree Rocket name would also be used for another Junior Calypso coaster, and Rookie Racer would see the 247-meter layout make it to the United States at Six Flags St. Louis. These junior coasters would be met by a custom layout with another coaster for Disney. Wandering Oaken's Sliding Sleighs would be a tiny but well-themed coaster to the Frozen films at Hong Kong Disneyland, with a small show scene before a double-down drop and some gentle turns over the water and through a small mountain. This wouldn't be the only coaster for Disney though, as Magic Kingdom would finally open their own Tron Light Cycle Run, with the same layout to the coaster in Shanghai. After building out a vast portfolio of different styles and layouts of thrilling coasters around the world, it was time for Vekoma to bring this new dynamism to their junior coasters. This new family launch coaster would use nearly identical trains to the junior coasters that had been used for nearly 20 years, and because of these smaller, lighter trains, the coasters would use the less common LIM launch rather than the more common LSMs. 2 of these would debut this year, with the smaller going to Sweden's Fruvik named Lightning. The train would roll right into the launch and complete many elevated twists above the station before rolling through the station and launching again, completing the layout a second time. The other and far larger would be Big Bear Mountain at Dollywood, Vekoma's first triple launch coaster, and feature onboard audio as well. This would complete another world-class, smooth layout Vekoma was now known for, with fantastic transitions and gorgeous terrain interaction through one of their longest layouts at just under 4,000 feet. This year wouldn't just be for families though, as just like the previous years, Vekoma would reboot one of their older models, this time their most popular with the boomerang. Rather than the slow lifts and winches, the new Super Boomerang would be built around a central tower, beginning with a multi-pass launch sequence and blasting backwards up the spike, before launching through the main layout. This would start with another stalling Immelman similar to Phoenix, before boosting into a double up with a dive, and another boost through a corkscrew and up another spike, before stalling and completing the layout in reverse. This straight line layout, with an abundance of launches to eliminate the possibility of valleying, and elements with every kind of sensation, would be yet another win, and brought nearly all of their most classic models into the modern age. This brings us to this year, where currently a massive slate of Vekoma coasters are scheduled to open. So let's first discuss the rides that are actually open, or ones that for sure will open at some point this year. Starting it off, our favorite park, Energylandia, opened their 9th and 10th Vekoma coasters this year in their new Sweet Valley Land. Even though they already featured 5 junior coasters, what's the harm in adding a 6th, as Honey Harbor features the Calypso layout and Choco Chip Creek is a custom mine train and one of their longest. The United States would see more junior Vekomas, beginning with their first 2 family boomerangs, including a 208-meter layout at Kings Island. The second would be custom, with the silly Good Gravy at Holiday World, with a few gentle turns before the spike in gravy boat themed trains. The next would be another brand new junior coaster layout called the Horace, debuting at New Hampshire's Santa's Village. If the Calypso is the new 207, Horace may be the new 335, as Midnight Flyer would stand slightly taller and longer, but feature a similarly gentle but fun layout. Going over to Ireland, Emerald Park opened 2 coasters, including the next suspended thrill coaster, and this one also wrapped around a family boomerang. Quest would use a slightly modified 238-meter layout, and Nafina Force would fly over and under with a great layout that would be very statistically similar to Hals-über-Kopf. The coaster would drop right under Quest and fly into an inverting overbank turn, before a corkscrew through the station and a 0G roll. After that, the layout would be less airtime focused than Hals-über-Kopf, with more positive G-filled turns and quick transitions. Later this year, Australia will open a handful of Vekoma coasters, including a few at Warner Bros. Movie World themed to The Wizard of Oz. Flight of the Wicked Witch looks to be the now standard 453-meter suspended family layout, and will fly right next to Kansas Twister, which is a clone of Tweestreed, the racing family boomerang. Down the road, Dreamworld will open another new coaster model called the Switchback Coaster, which again looks to use the junior coaster trains, but through a large, well-themed facade and with a new trick. At some point, the coaster will come up a spike that will rotate and drop the train either forwards or backwards. This may be a way to evolve the family boomerang concept to be able to run multiple trains, and will further push Vekoma as the best children's coaster manufacturer out there. Another of these switchback coasters is set to open at Bon Luxury Park in Mexico, along with 4 other Vekoma coasters. These include another Horus model, the 375-meter family suspended layout found on Phoenix, and an unknown extreme coaster. Mexico is also set to receive Serpentica at the former La Feria de Chapultepec, which has been renamed Aslan Park Urbano, right in the heart of the city. This layout, listed as the 550-meter coaster, will be the first family suspended coaster to be able to run multiple trains, and begins with a small dark ride section before the lift. After that, the coaster will drop into a non-inverting, but still very fun, smooth, and fast-paced layout we've come to expect from Vekoma. On top of all those coasters, another 3 parks in China are scheduled to open with 208-meter family boomerangs at each of them, with maybe more Vekoma coasters as well. Another park in China received a fighter jet and pine tree rocket duo, with the standard Top Gun launch coaster, and this time, the less common 185-meter family boomerang layout respectively. 2 more of these parks are scheduled to open as well, with 2 more Top Gun coasters and 2 more 208-meter family boomerangs as well, along with another park with a Space Warp clone of Formula and yet another 208-meter family boomerang, so 6 more of these layouts going to China. We've finally made it to the present day, but that of course brings us to the future. Starting with more junior coasters at brand new parks, the Netherlands will open Boulderbahn at Bommelworld, which looks to be a new custom indoor coaster, and Missouri will open a new park called Oasis at Lakeport with 2 new coasters. These are scheduled to be another 453-meter family suspended and another 208-meter family boomerang named Shootout, as Vekoma is slowly making its way back into North America. The third family launch coaster is set to open at Poland's Mandoria, with Aquila having a compact layout launching inside a central tower. Yeti Trek will open at Santa's Village with a new custom junior coaster layout, which is now being rebranded as the Family Coaster instead of the Junior. This will begin with a diving drop similar to the Calypso, before a station flyby and some ground-hugging turns in the woods. There will also be another Calypso at France's Winnowland named Wild West Coaster, and 3 more coasters will open at the new ambitious Six Flags Qiddiya. Twilight Express will be another Horus, and Adrenaline will be a new family suspended coaster with a custom layout and the ability to run 2 trains. The third will be yet another rebooted model from Vekoma, this time something they only built once, with the long-awaited return of the Tilt Coaster. After nearly 25 years, Vekoma will debut 3 of these coasters next year, with the largest being Iron Rattler, which will also be Vekoma's tallest and fastest coaster on top of the thrilling tilt. Beginning with a straight 208-foot drop, the ride will pack in 5 unique inversions, beginning with a stalling inside top hat similar to Phoenix, a barrel roll drop, and a brand new exciting element, a double 0G roll. This first of its kind, large double inversion will provide excellent forces and is joined by a final 0G roll, a couple off-axis hills, and a double up dive. But after years of waiting, the United States will finally get its first taste of new thrilling Vekomas, and on top of the tilt coasters, Flash Vertical Velocity will open at Six Flags Great Adventure as the second Super Boomerang. Circuit Breaker will open at Codaland, which will be located next to a large racetrack, this time using a layout Vekoma calls the Pitfall, with 4 inversions. This will be the shortest of the tilt coasters of the year, with just over 2,000 feet of track, but still pack in the rollover camelback from the Top Gun model, a barrel roll drop, and another stalling Immelman before a flurry of hills and a final barrel roll. The third is the surprise Siren's Curse at Cedar Point, Vekoma's second coaster and first thrilling at this world-renowned park. Originally planned to open at Energylandia and then sent to Six Flags Mexico, this last-minute addition will bring the eye-catching tilt to America's rock and roller coast. This will use the cliffhanger layout, beginning with a twisting drop rather than the straight seen on the other two of the year. While featuring only 2 inversions, this will still be taller and longer than Circuit Breaker and pack in many smooth, quick twists and transitions. I don't think any manufacturer has ever been able to successfully flip their reputation so quickly, from the biggest laughingstock in the roller coaster industry to the most desired in less than a decade. Now, they produce undoubtedly the smoothest running rides on the market, with fun and comfortable layouts and perfect forces. The one area they could still improve is their trains, but even then, you really just have to nitpick now, as they are still the manufacturer parks crave for some of the best coasters on the market. Thanks for watching another roller coaster manufacturer series. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out my series on Intamin, as well as more videos to come in the future. I nearly forgot 3 major coasters coming in the future I'd be devastated to have left out. First, the compact Gronalund in Sweden will be expanding and somehow squeeze in its own custom-launched Vekoma. The layout looks like a winding mess of track and features possibly 4 inversions and plenty of airtime moments on an incredible waterside setting. The other 2 are recently announced coasters from Disney, and while no official manufacturers were announced, the concept art clearly shows 2 Vekoma-looking rides. The first is a Monsters, Inc. themed coaster at Hollywood Studios, using the suspended coaster trains as Disney's first inverted coaster. Riders will be loaded and then raised like an elevator before entering the warehouse and completing smooth turns through the building. The other is another Marvel-themed attraction using what looks to be either the spinning trains of Cosmic Rewind or perhaps a revival of the minecart trains from Expedition Everest. This will be the first ever coaster based on Spider-Man, and will feature multiple launches and show scenes as well as a reverse launch.